Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you're watching on YouTube, you can find out more about what we do at officehours.global. First hour is general discussion about media and virtual production, and the second hour is something we like to spend a little bit more time on. Today, we're actually going to do 2 hours of Q&A, but tomorrow we'll do education. We are going to continue the we didn't schedule anyone for the 10 o'clock time for education, but we are going to continue to talk about Keynote. We've had 2 weeks of that, and there's some more notes, and people seem to be really interested in it. So we're going to go off air at 8 a.m. and then back on air at 10 to spend an hour just trading notes and talking about tips and tricks of how we're using it. We were a little surprised by the number of people that were interested in the conversation. So anyway, we're going to go back to that. And now we're going to jump into the questions. Bill, take it away.
Absolutely. Our first one comes this morning from Noah Sargent in Fullerton, California. And he says, what frequency analyzer do you use for RF and how often do you scan?
Go ahead, Rupert.
I'm not going to say that this exactly answers your question, but I think one essential thing in the RF toolbox is one of these is RTL-SDR. It's a software-defined radio. You can put an antenna on this thing and then plug it into your computer and load up some software, and you can bring up huge amounts of radio spectrum in spectrum analysis view and bring it up in a waterfall and look at all kinds of frequency and spectrum and bandwidth. So it's not specific to one use case or one manufacturer or something like that, but it's a very useful RF troubleshooting tool.
Good guy.
Yeah, one that's popular that I see in the freelance world is this RF Explorer. It's a like $499 device that people use to scan. Myself, I'll use the 688 with the electro receivers, and there's a scan function on there, and it'll just scan for open frequencies and it'll even assign them.
Yeah, I use the RF Explorer as well. That's what I got in my bag. Next question.
Next one comes from John Snyder in Reno, Nevada, and he says, following up from Monday's office hours, what new thoughts do you have about NFTs and how you might use them?
Go ahead, Sky.
It's a completely new experience for me, but I reached out to a friend that is deep into understanding how to do the new finance of the new future. And his response is, my knowledge is all based on general enterprise blockchain. NFTs are the next level of speculative craziness I want no part of. At least that's his opinion. So I'd be very curious if we wanted to invite my friend Eric Weaver, who is deep into blockchain, to flesh out the conversation.
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
I had a friend that was showing me his AMC NFT to help with the theater company, trying to, I guess, stick around. And then I also had a conversation the other day with a group that are going to plan to use NFTs to fund as a movie that they want to put together. So you would get like a little coin or something like that saying that you were a participant, which is pretty cool. But I'm not getting in there just yet because I want to see how things go a little bit.
What does AMC do? I saw that go by, but I didn't see what are they actually doing with NFTs?
I think they're just save and you maybe get a discount or so. I didn't read the whole thing myself, so.
Right. Go ahead, Noah.
I think it's kind of interesting that most of us have that natural reaction of like kicking and screaming when something new comes up of like, I don't know if I want to deal with this. I don't want to research this. But there's something to that. I think that if we counter that initial reaction and just spend a little bit of time and think about it, NFTs can be something that can be extremely useful. And so specifically to the next company or whatever that I'm working on now, that's something that we're considering and looking at.
Go ahead, Chris.
I want everybody to think about this for a little bit. I think NFTs are kind of like Beanie Babies. You know, I mean, remember they had TV shows about like, you got to buy this Beanie Baby. They're only going to make and it's like it's a thing that people put an artificial value to, and then they inflate the price and clamor to buy it.
They have other things like that, like the Mona Lisa.
Yeah, I know. You're not wrong.
Yeah.
You're not wrong, but it's just kind of a Beanie Baby.
Yeah, I have a friend who was buying from an artist a long time ago, he was buying this artist's work for $500 a unit, $500 to $1,000 a unit. It turned out to be a guy named Picasso. So he has a really nice house. In case you're
never heard of him.
Yeah, but he didn't buy it. And here's the thing that's interesting: we could probably bring him on at some point to talk about it, but he didn't buy them because he was trying to invest in them. He bought them because he liked them. Like he just thought that they were really cool. And that's where I think NFTs make sense, is when you're buying things that you're interested in, and they are an original, and it's something that you're passionate about. And, there's another, I think I've told the story before, but I went to this little dealer that sells only half finished slides from Warner Brothers cartoons. And it was because he loved them. And as a kid, he dumpster dived outside of the Warner Brothers lot and kept them carefully for 50 years. Like just 50 years, he had all these folders because he just loved them so much. And when he was running out of money, someone said, well, you should try to sell those. Go have them. And someone, he took one of them to be appraised. And, the guy was like, how many do you have? And he goes, like a garage full of these. And they built whole galleries around it. He doesn't have to work anymore. He's not broke. Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, I've gotten interested more in what Peter Hurley's doing in his community with these things he's calling shebangers, and he's got 1.3 thousand of them. And it just, after the discussion, made me just look at them more and see, who has them, and kind of the history and the listings and how to mint them and all that. So it's just opened up my mind a little more. And then it also made me go, hey, I need some ETH. So I read an article about mining Ethereum in the cloud. So of course I ran over there, fired up a bunch of spot instances, and Churig and I went on this crazy path. So I now know how to turn a dollar into 80 cents. So there's a good way to lose money on AWS mining crypto, and I know how to do it. So if you need more financial advice, follow me on Twitter.
The business model, volume.
And I do think the one thing that I will say that I have done really well on is I don't worry too much about whether something's going to be popular long term. I worry about whether I can make money on the short term without too much risk. So I did really well in 3D, in case you're wondering, like stereo. We made tools and we did production and 360 video. I made a lot of money on that too. So now, did it last? No. Does it matter? No. Go ahead. And that's why I think we need to study it and figure out where we might be able to, do something with it. I'm not talking about making millions. I'm just talking about, we might be able to flip some stuff in here and learn about it. And if it turns out, we're there. Go ahead, Noah.
Yeah, definitely probably 90% of what we see on NFTs may not develop into anything, but that 10% could be gold. I mean, it could be something worthwhile, and it could structure into something awesome. Another thing that I wanted to point out, like value, just like beauty, is in the eye of the beholder, right? So if you see it and perceive it as valuable, then it's valuable to you. Like I have no interest in baseball cards, but somebody out there really cares about those.
And 99.9999% of the baseball cards were worthless. It's, we have to remember that, like, when we look at it, NFTs will be the same thing, that the vast majority will be worthless. Most of the things that people try to collect don't ever turn out to be anything, but sometimes they hit gold. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, the problem with all collectibles, and that includes NFTs, is knowing when to get out of the market. And that's the important thing to know. And it's in the stock market, they call it pump and dump. And it's the same thing. You utilize penny stocks were big for a while too, in the stock market. So it's the same thing, only under a different title or a different name.
And people were trying to figure out what to do with oil when it first came out. it was like, what are we supposed to do?
That actually has intrinsic value.
They were throwing the gasoline away. The gasoline was a byproduct of the oil, and they were like, "What else could we do with this trash?" Anyway, go ahead, Jeffrey.
So to answer your question from the earlier, AMC is going to be airdropping discounts and other benefits if you have their token, and they're also planning to do different types of tokens. So when the next Marvel movie comes out, you could get the Marvel token and then get some special discounts with that.
I think that the thing about, I think that they're going the wrong way in that area. I mean, I've thought about it a little bit. I think going to a movie, what you should have is collectibles that we give you because you went to the theater. So here's a picture, or here's a thing, and we're not going to promise you anything in the future. We're just giving you were there. It was kind of like your ticket that was valuable, and maybe something. I don't know if you need to start creating complicated benefits other than you have it. That's something that's an artifact of your experience. And that probably is more valuable in more exclusive events than a general movie release, but you could do a lot of really interesting things, I think, and I don't know if they're valuable yet. No one does. But I think it could be really, really interesting. I'm really curious about the idea of giving people things as not having them buy things, but giving them as part of their participation. And then if it turns into something valuable, it turns into something valuable. But, that's something I'm pondering. Next question.
James Hutchinson is up next from Dublin, Ireland. He says the 2.0 Office Hours View in Office Hours Original is pale and washed out. Please explain why and how this is and how it affects the end result in Office Hours 2.0.
If you look at it on YouTube and you have an HDR display, it will look really bright. So what actually happens here is that if you think about a linear curve, that's what most of what we're doing. The Rec 709 is not exactly, but pretty close to a linear curve there. And what happens is that what this is very rough because I'm just drawing it, but PQ is kind of like this. And so what it does is it flattens these whites off, and it actually is more like this because it flattens the blacks off as well. So it pulls all those in. A monitor that knows what to do with that will pull that in, and it has more information up here and more information down here than it did before. Than what you can store in linear. And so then what you're able to do is actually pull that information out and have more brightness when you straighten it out and to redisplay it onto the monitor. And so that is what gives HDR a lot more range. If you look at it on something that doesn't know what it is, it looks washed out. So what we're doing is for the monitors that know what they're looking at, you're going to get this really vibrant, bright image. If you look at it on an iPhone of the last year or two on YouTube, you're going to find that it doesn't look washed out. It only looks washed out in a standard dynamic range world. And we are going to hopefully next week start to do the standard dynamic range stream to make sure that it's going out okay as well. And so the idea is, most people will actually watch this on, eventually what we're going to do is have a button inside of Mukana that says, do you want to watch the HDR or the SDR? And you push it and it just shows you one or the other. And then that'll make it a lot easier for you to figure out what you need. Go ahead, Chris.
So curious, Alex. So coming out of the switcher which is generating the cut and the super source, do you then have to pardon me, but DA that and process one as standard def and then let the other one go as HDR? Or standard, what do I say? I said standard def.
Because all the Zoom folks are in SDR, we will the show is running in SDR and then it's converted right at the very end to HDR. So we just stretch it out a little bit to make it work.
So if you wanted to broadcast an SDR version of it, you peel that off before it gets processed.
Exactly.
Gotcha.
Exactly. Gotcha. Now, eventually where we have to go to really take advantage of this is the other way around, which is that the switcher will be running in HDR and then we'll convert it back down to SDR because that's when we want to, because right now everything has to be in SDR, but what happens when we have an HDR plate? So we've shot something in HDR or we're going to do an HDR example, imagine HDR training. That wants to be in HDR as it goes into the switcher. And then we bring it back down to SDR. And so that's that part we're still working on. And that's going to, that will require another device to do that. So yeah, so that's why we're playing with it.
Is that when we get 4K 60 HDR Zoom feeds?
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's again, remember that the HDR doesn't have to, it could be just the raw content that we're, so we could be all just stretched up. And we've done events like this where we have the participants coming in SDR, they get bumped to HDR. They get mixed with HDR content. So when we play out HDR content, you see it in HDR. That's the big advantage. Then when we, so that's what you want to see is that you see this beautiful thing and the people look like they match. Like they don't look like they're blown out or anything else. They just look like they match the footage. That's all we want. For a conversation over Zoom, it doesn't matter as much. Obviously somewhere we'd love to get 10-bit and then get HDR, get an HDR curve from everybody. That's Office Hours 3.0. so is, that's going to be, all the in Office Hours 3.0, which I think would be mid 2023. We probably will want all of the panelists to have, they're going to be sending us log, in 10-bit or 12-bit, and we will be then incorporating it in. We'll be cutting a low latency version and having a higher latency version, and it will look like nothing anybody's ever seen before. And so still after a year and a half, because the broadcasters they don't have the money to scale. Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
If you're interested, I just cut a user supplied video, people sending in their own video. Just finished it yesterday. 13 participants, 3 of them sent me stuff from their phone in HDR.
Yeah.
So it's growing.
It's coming, and we have we're testing some stuff that would let us record in Apple ProRes 444 locally. Yeah, while you're like, so enough of the fireside stuff. So like this is like a whole different level. So yeah. So it should be fun. Anyway, next question.
Next one comes to us from Rupert McRae here on the panel from Dallas, Texas. With Office Hours 2.0 and HDR on its way, does the panel need to be more disciplined about not sharing screens with white backgrounds?
Yeah, we're going to have to keep. I mean, it's become very clear that it's painful when you do that. So we will have to not be. We won't be able to be as opportunistic and grab web pages as we move forward. We'll have to. I mean, we can get away with it for a little while, but at some point, in the next couple months, we'll have to stop doing that. So that comes hopefully with building a team that will do that for us. Like, oh, grab this URL, and someone pulls it out. They pull the background out. They put it in a thing. You saw me play with that yesterday with the. Although I think I might have done it over white anyway, but starting to play with like throwing everything into Keynote really fast and then making it available. And I have to jump into a meeting to prepare for another meeting and so I'm going to leave this off to Bill to continue running the show. So
thank you, Alex.
Thanks, everybody.
Again,
We'll see
have
you.
a great day.
I will try to be back at 9:00 to flip the thing. So I bet I may do it blindly. So no, at 9 or somewhere after that, the whole thing may end because I'll be going into another 9:00 meeting. It's a busy morning. All right. Thanks, everybody.
That's fine. We're used to that. The last time I did this, it just stopped in the middle, and that's okay.
So
anyway, welcome one and all. Let's just keep going. We have a next question up. No, in fact, I think, Chris Fenwick, did you have a chance to weigh in on that? Or is that everything you wanted to say?
No, Alex was talking about doing the slides in not showing web pages with things. And so I was going to point out when I did the Beanie Baby picture, that's exactly what I did. I pulled it out of a web page. I put it over a gray background.
I'm a little surprised that there's not a way to just clamp the signal when it goes over into an HDR feed to 80% or 70% or whatever the white value would be.
But you have to do. The problem is, so think about it. Here's me. You want me in HDR, and then I'm going to cut to a feed. This is for an upcoming question,
right?
And all of a sudden, it's chasing. So it's the auto iris of level control, and you don't want that. So you just have to bring everything in safe, so it's not trying to, because it's coming in on the exact same feed from me. If it was a feed and all graphics came from something, then you could say, okay, let's just.
Well, maybe I just don't understand the technology. I would think that on the HDR feed, a clamp at 80% IRE on the whites might work, but maybe I don't know. And let's go to Guy and get other people who are involved in the conversation who know much more than I do. Guy, what was your thought?
You're on the right path, Bill. It's what Chris is trying to say is that it's an overall clamp that would appear. So he would turn to mud. So like if I'm here and I want to show a white web page like I did earlier, what I'm doing, if you look at these scopes, you can see that I'm taking it down to about 89%, and that way I'm not blinding everybody. So I'm being mindful of it, or have been for the last couple of shows. After somebody said something that it was blinding, so I've been taking it down. But this might be harder to do in something like the Blackmagic, because this won't have any. If you take gain and you try to bring that down here, this is going to have no effect on a source like a computer. So you need something in between to actually make that adjustment to the pixels. So.
So you couldn't identify what was 255 white, 255, 255, 255, and if you see that,
what's the latency on making that clamp happen, though?
You got a point, and that's why I'm not an engineer.
I'm saying this is going to be an interesting problem, because as I've noticed in the last couple of years, white is a very popular color.
Yes,
and we're banning it.
Yeah, I hear you. And this is an issue. Courtney, do you want to weigh in on this?
I'd love to weigh in on this. Yeah, because I feel kind of I would rather not get too propeller head on worrying about the contrast ratio, and cutting to a white web page, because the value contained in the web page. So it takes it a second or two to readjust to the contrast back to normalcy. I think the information imparted by the web page is far more important than the contrast ratio of the web page. So unless there's a way to automatically do it in the background, I would avoid I would not suggest staying away from presenting any visuals at all or any reference to the web page, because we don't have controls over the contrast of white backgrounds on a web page unless they had some way of inverting that signal coming in to make the whites black and the blacks white to solve that problem. But if they had a way to do that on Alex's back end in 2.0, then that might solve that problem. But then you'd have to deal with switching it back and forth between inverse and normal every time you switch to a web page or something. So I think that the value of the contents of the web page are far more important than the contrast of the web.
Maybe there's an opportunity for us to sell office hours sunscreen if that ever happens. Noah, take over. What's happening?
Yeah, I'll do the other half of the bit with Courtney, and I'll give you the product. No, before that, I'll say if you are going to a brighter thing or contrast to your thing, I would highly recommend doing a dissolve instead of a straight cut like Courtney was just doing. But there is a tool, and I'm going to show that now. So this is a web page, and it usually has the white, right? And so it's actually a Chrome extension called Turn Off the Lights, excuse me. So I'm going to go ahead and click to this next page, which will be brighter, so watch your eyes. But this is what the Chrome extension looks like. And like I said, you basically can flip this on or off to darken most of your screen. And so you can go in here and set the settings. I basically have a black opacity at 37%, and that's what creates that change essentially. But it works pretty good. It's free. It's not perfect, but it's a start.
And let's see if the technologists help us out with this. Roscoe, you had some thoughts.
Well, specular highlights are just looking at the reflections, like looking at a chrome piece and that kind of stuff. But when you put a full white, bright white page up there, it's like looking directly into a light. And that's why it really can't be used the way that, it's not just when you say 255, but that's 255 at 1,000 nits. That's like you're looking right into a light.
And the spec for that is 10,000 nits. So people who do not know what they're doing could also damage Twinkle, I think. Let's go ahead and move on. I think, obviously there's a lot of technical things to be finished, to be dealt with before we go through. The next question is David Brady in New York City. He says, when pushing text content into Zoom via capture device, a computer via ATEM or a dedicated capture device, if the look is a dual spotlight, Zoom's voice switching will toggle the focus and the resolution. Is there any way to remedy this? Do we have any Zoom extra? Rupert's going to sneak in on this.
Yeah, I'm not. The way I'm reading it is that there's two feeds coming into Zoom. One's probably a speaker, the other one's probably slides or a presentation, but they're both coming in as video, and the slides are coming in via a webcam feed. So, and that the spotlight view is toggling when the speaker comes up, probably toggling HD away from the slides because it's no longer in demand in HD. That's the way I'm reading it. I'm not sure. I think this is maybe a side effect of perhaps the new behavior we've seen in Zoom, where gallery view or multi-spotlight will only produce one HD feed at a time. I'm not sure. I would like to see what the behavior would be if it's pinned on a 4K screen, and then at least the real estate you've got used by your two spotlights might likely demand the 1080 from both, but I would just need to test it.
This feels to me like one of those things where Zoom is developing so fast because there is so much pressure on them to continue to expand the service and deal with all these use cases that they never probably really thought of back in the days when when I first used Zoom, it was 8 or 9 years ago, and it was just for teachers, and it was the most rudimentary service, and the distance it's come since then is unbelievable, and I'm sure that continues to go. Courtney has some thoughts on this. Courtney?
Yeah, I was just going to confirm really what Rupert said. It probably they've written it to use the tally, which is triggered by audio, which is the little box around your image in gallery view, to trigger the request for upres from each source. So they've tied that request for upres to that tally, which is controlled by the audio. And so if one person is talking in a dual spotlight window, they will receive, their computer will deliver a 1080p, but the other person who's not talking, they will down res to, whatever smaller portion they can deliver,
Yeah, in the early part of this, if we were only in a panelist and we didn't have anything else, Zoom would always download us to the lowest possible resolution. It was small, and I think frame rate limited, but then as soon as you started talking, it recognized that and popped you up.
Well, the problem's going to be, since if Office Hours 2.0 is going to be doing the dual spotlighting, essentially the super source instead of dual spotlighting, then Zoom doesn't know you're dual spotlighted. So, but they're going to be bringing in everybody at 1080p. So I guess maybe that won't be a problem in Office Hours 2.0.
Chris has some thought. Oh, Rupert McRae first, then Chris. Rupert, go ahead.
I didn't catch if this was a Office Hours 2.0 question specifically, or just a wider question about Zoom. I was just also thinking though that the way I think we used to do this before, maybe they made the change, is that if you have both of those feeds, Spotlight, I guess you can't, or pinned, I guess, on other machines at full screen, so that at least you're getting the 1080p demand from the contributor. But I still
I always thought of pinning as something that you did for yourself that affected your view.
It will, but if at least somebody has got you pinned full screen somewhere, your camera should be producing the 1080p feed then.
I see,
because somebody, at least one person, is requesting it.
Right, even if it's you. Yeah, right. Chris Fenwick.
Rupert, I think you were onto something when you said if you set it up on a high-res screen where each window
4K
is demanding at least 1920 by 1080. So let's a lot of us have big screens. I have big screens. We could do a little test in After Hours.
Okay, so that's something that maybe if you're interested in that after the show, head over to After Hours, which is where a lot of these kind of tests happen in real time. So you get some really good information about what actually works in the real world. Let's move on to the next question. That comes from Jacob Goodnight in Indianapolis, Indiana. And he says, what's the most affordable mixer to have the Dan Dugan AutoMixer feature? Is it the Behringer X32 or the Yamaha TF1? Who are our audio guys here? Which one has the Dugan software? Do we know? I guess we don't. This is one of those days. Tuesday, I would just suggest, is mostly in Office Hours when we have a great compendium of audio experts. And so it'd be a great question for next Tuesday. You may get farther, but Chris Fenwick has some thoughts.
I think the Behringer might do it. John has a Behringer, right, John? Does that do Dugan?
Does the Dugan
it's pretty
built
cheap.
in?
It does Dugan, but they don't call it Dugan, right? That's my understanding.
Oh, so it's a Dugan-esque.
Yeah. So everybody talks about that.
I retract my knowledge from the pool of information.
Well, they have some initial things that they can work with over the weekend, but if you're serious about getting a deeper dive into that, I'd come back next Tuesday, and our audio experts will undoubtedly have the final word. Let's move on to John Snyder's question. It's coming up next from Reno, Nevada, and he says, does anyone on the panel use a Scarlett Focusrite as a USB interface to the Mac? My direct monitor knob affects both monitor headphones and mic output, which means my mic levels are low and my ears are getting damaged. Any suggestions? We're going to start with Roscoe Jones.
Well, I don't have the Scarlett, but we do use this in the editing room when we put two students on the same computer while they're editing, and that is just a headphone with a inline volume adjustment. So that would work for you too.
Okay, Chris Fenwick.
Yeah, I don't know that this is the same thing. It is Scarlett. It is Focusrite. It's the 2i2. On this one, and I'm sorry, John, I don't know if I have the right thing, but there's a monitor level and a headphone level. And I believe if you turn the monitor level, your headphone will go down. So if you want to adjust the ratio of how much headphone, hey, I could be totally wrong about all this, but if you want to adjust the ratio of the headphone, so you can say, I want my headphones really loud, and now the big knob here will make the monitor output and your headphones go up. But if you want to ratio down your headphone, you could do that.
So you're basically using the headphone knob as a trim control to determine how much of that signal is being injected into the main.
Yeah. Maybe. So if you like to listen to your headphones really quiet, you'd turn this down, but this will adjust when your headphones go up and down, and then just readjust it. I think that's how it works. I haven't used this since
I wonder if there's some switching inside that makes that possible, because that seems like an odd design. I mean, normally the headphone circuit is detached from.
It's a $150 audio device. It is what it is.
All right, fair enough. Chris Fenwick is just finished, so let's move on to the next question. Jason Panks in Nashville, Tennessee is up next. He says, current microphone suggestions for Zoom, and his price range is between $20 and $100 US. Noah Sargent starts us.
Sure. I have the Samsung QU. I think that's the right one. Q2U, excuse me, for $69. I've used this before and seen it used before. So it has both a USB interface and an XLR out. The key though with audio is to keep the microphone as close as you can to the mouth, as you may know, because that will give you the best sound.
Fabulous. Chris Fenwick is next.
So a while back, I was doing a recording with a client. I was like, "Oh, you sound really good. What does that sound? You know, what mic are you using?" And they said, "Oh, I got this mic at Walmart, and this is it. It was $25, and I don't know who makes it. I don't know if they still sell it, but it was really good. You don't get 3 of them, by the way. That's just 3 angles of the same microphone. So it's one mic.
3 for $20 would be impressive.
One mic, $25. That's just 3 different ways of orienting it in front of you. So I didn't want to make anybody think that you got 3 mics.
Interesting. Rupert.
I think we're kind of still supportive of the Yeti microphones. You can get one of those for just under the $100 mark on the upper side of the scale. So that would
A
be
lot
an
of people
option.
talk about them all the time. So
But, yeah, for audio, just get off Wi-Fi, get earphones, and then microphone.
Courtney Gooden has a thought.
It depends. It depends on whether you have a mixer to plug it into. Of course, there's the tried and true SM58, which is usually $100. This one's $99. And if you need a USB microphone, Audio-Technica, although this is a little more expensive, is about $149. They do make some that are about $89 for a large diaphragm condenser that is USB, has the built-in USB interface, also has monitoring out, so you can plug your headphones in for zero latency monitoring of your USB bus, and that's about $150. So if you include the microphone and the USB interface, that's, might fall within your price range.
Absolutely.
Just note the white webpage.
I'll just note a couple of things. Part of it is going to be the microphone itself, and USB is the most popular standard now for feeding Zoom directly because it can plug directly into your computer. It's a digital signal. It's not prone to RF and things like that if it's properly configured. In fact, I don't think there's a way that RF can get into it because it's an all digital signal. But if you decide that you want to move up and move to regular microphones, of which there are so many more variations, and particularly higher quality variations, eventually you're going to need to adapt whatever you're using into the older style, but still very present and robust, and that is connections that are balanced via XLR cables. So it's interesting to me that some of the mic manufacturers are doing combinations. They have a USB feed, but they also have XLRs that allow you to work in both worlds. So if you're just going to be doing this on your computer and you don't have any designs on going past that, those digital microphones are a really great solution, and they're better than they've ever been before, in my opinion. If you decide you want to eventually get off and expand beyond into the classical world of audio, where balanced audio lines, which provide for really long feeds with low noise and actively suppressed noise, having equipment that works on that old standard is a really good thing. And you will get into the need to interface between those two to get your XLR-based microphones into the digital realm, which is where you get into interfaces and transcoders and things like that. So just understand that that's kind of the future if you want to continue down the audio pathway. Most professional audio today is still not delivered via USB. It is delivered by digital circumstances often, and they're getting away from the old analog stuff, but it's still out there, and the equipment is fabulous. Let's move on. Anthony Sofrino, it looks like, from Diamond Bar, California, says, does anyone use the Shure MV7 mic, and does it require less gain boost using the XLR cable, and about how much? I know the SM7B is notorious for needing a large gain boost, which requires some sort of device like a cloud lifter that he mentions here. So let's go to Sky first.
I was recommended this microphone by our friend Mickey. And then I purchased it from our friend Guy. And consequently, it is an MV7 going directly through a USB-C cable directly into a MacBook Pro. I only use the software that comes with it, the Shure Plus Motive, I guess is how they pronounce it. But that's the only amplification or modification I do. I have not used it with an XLR cable. So to your point, I'll let somebody else speak to it. But that's what this microphone sounds like at this distance for about 5 months.
Okay. Chris Fenwick wants to get out on this.
I had a specific question for Sky. Sky, on the scale of how loud you can turn that up, I'm sorry, I'm a little loud. On the scale of how loud you can turn that up, where are you about? Do you have any more headroom? Could you?
Oh, tons. I have
okay.
tons
So
of it. And the goofy thing is, it's actually got a touch sensor
Yeah, I know.
on the
Cute.
microphone that you can actually do the dialing right there.
I've
And I
actually
love that. Also has the playback. So I'm listening to this experience, and you can adjust how much you can get your
and
side
you're
tone.
hearing yourself with zero latency, which is a very
Yeah.
nice feature. Yeah, I've bought those for a
Win-win.
few of our producers. They're good.
Yeah, and they're compact and lightweight, and they're under $300.
Yeah, different generation, the 7B and the MV7. The MV7 has been designed more recently, and it is that combination. It has that digital, all digital design for that, designed to interface with computers, as opposed to the 7B, which is a classic mic. I spent my early voiceover career working with a Shure SM5B, the predecessor to that. And if you're hooking them into the new digital systems like a computer, you definitely need to get the volume up, because they're just traditional dynamic mics that put out very, very low volume level. And that's why things like the Fedhead and the Cloud Lifter, those are common devices that take the gain from a dynamic mic, boost it up to a place where a computer sees a more robust signal. I do know that here in office hours, we sometimes have trouble with the folks who buy a 7B for podcasting, and it's pretty much low output, and we often struggle a little bit to get them up to the office hours new level of -20 decibels. That doesn't mean they're bad mics. They're extremely good mics, and in the correct system with the correct gain structure in front of them, they can sound fabulous. But the new stuff tends to be USB, and it's all digital, and it's a little easier to work with. There's no question about that. Let's move on. Jason Panks from Nashville is our next questioner. He says, any quirks or must-know options for running a Zoom meeting versus a webinar? And Rupert McCrae is going to start us out.
So, I mean, I guess all the best practice stuff applies to both. I'm reading the question is really what the difference is between the two in Zoom. There are a few feature differences for sure. Some subtle ones that might catch you out, like if you're using the registration features and you want auto reminders, there's some differences there. If you want recurring reminders for your registrants, there's also the terminology can sometimes get flip-flopped between meetings and webinars. In a meeting, you have participants, and in webinar, you have attendees and panelists. Sometimes those things will get crisscrossed and people will talk about participants in a webinar. Well, it's just a mix up of the nomenclature at that point. So it's important to keep the terminology correct. The meeting, I mean, another example is meetings, you can have waiting room. And in webinar, you don't have waiting room, you can have practice session. There are a few different variations. So I'll put a link in the chat for some other ones also.
Let's move on to Guy Cochran.
Yeah, some of the things to watch out for. There's no breakout rooms as of yet. It was announced at Zoomtopia a while back that we would get it, but it's not here in this current version, so that can be a big deal. The other thing is resolution. Depending on how you're pushing it out, it's really easy to get 720 with to the attendees to view it as with a portal or something like that. Whereas to get 1080p webinar, it's very, very challenging. So it just depends on if resolution makes a difference. If you want to record this and put it up on YouTube or Vimeo or somewhere in the future, there's also a huge cost difference. Once you start getting to over 500 people, you're talking about big bucks, and meetings are subject to 1,000 people maximum in a meeting. So if you're going to get more than that, you have to go to webinar. Participant list is available in a regular meeting. You can see who's in there. Versus in a webinar, if it matters, you can't see everybody. Another thing is Q&A. So webinar has Q&A where you can actually let people ask questions, and you can make it so that those questions are only visible to the panelists, and so the attendees can't see those beforehand. So, and then PayPal, if you're selling, if you want to have somebody pay to attend that webinar, there's PayPal integration directly in webinar, and so you can actually have people pay to attend that meeting.
Great information. Thank you. Chris Fenwick.
Guy and Rupert are super smart, and I'd listen to everything they say. The only thing I was going to mention, if nobody did, was the breakout rooms. And I think it was a year ago they announced that.
Yeah. Okay. So hopefully that helped, Jason. Thanks for the question. Let's move on to the next one from John Snyder. John in Reno, Nevada says, I've been unable to acquire shelves from my Ikea Ivar system over the past month. What is the supply chain issue, or what is a supply chain issue that has impacted you? We're going to start with Courtney Gooden.
Well, it sounds strange. It doesn't sound like it has much to do with production, but I'd say COVID-19 home tests. They've become very rare, at least in Los Angeles, and on almost all productions these days a lot of them require, of course, proof of vaccination, but even some that do have proof of vaccination as a requirement also require a negative test before you can go on the set on production. And since the start of the school year also required testing, it kind of sucked all the home tests out of the market, and the supply could not refill them. And so you found people that couldn't go out on production because they couldn't get tested, because all the test sites were booked up for weeks. And of course, you don't have the luxury of waiting a week to work on a production. You have to work on it when it happens. So that's been a problem in the supply line for me.
Fair enough. Chris Fenwick.
I had an issue buying a vehicle last year. Because I special ordered it, they could get all the options I wanted, but a lot of the options I wanted were not available because of the chip shortage. And the thing that fascinates me is we've heard rumblings and rumors and bears on my of people saying that some manufacturers are saying it won't be till 2024 that they'll have certain chips, which is astonishing to me. That somebody can't just say, hey, there's a lot of unemployed people. Can't we just make a chip fab in Southern California and crank some of these things out? I don't get it.
Pop-up chip fab. Interesting idea.
No, I'm not saying pop-up. It'll stick around, but if we need this stuff, why don't we put these people to work? I don't get it.
Interesting. I will say that we went out to rent a car because a relative of mine had a car stolen. I think that's happening a little bit more because it's so hard to get cars. And the rental car places don't even have them. It was like, we can get you in 2 days to get a car. It's just crazy out there right now. Guy Cochran has some thoughts.
Yeah, a few years ago, back when Steve Jobs was still around and Barack Obama wanted him to bring the iPhone home, to be manufactured in the U.S., the math just didn't make sense. So to answer your question, Chris, it's a math and a resources game. Like some of those things, if you want that little tiny piece, it's available down a few miles away. Whereas here in the U.S., it's so spread apart, and some of the stuff you can't keep on hand. So you could make a phone. I've seen videos on YouTube where people can put together an entire phone just on pieces that they can go buy at this one area that's got everything. But to answer the question, we've been deeply impacted as DV store. We've been just pummeled. I used to bring in these lights, the Diva ring light, and it's just been slaughtered. It's so hard to get stuff and then have it reliable. And then the unloading of the ships down at the ports has just been a nightmare. So we've been having to back off on a lot of that. And then things like Jason Bache needed some Shure stuff, and we were just told 120 days out, and we need to install it soon. And it's just like Panasonic UE150s 4 months out. So, and then Sound Devices Mixpre 3s, in addition to the fire that occurred. Now we're hearing those things are over a year out. So it's like, man, we needed this stuff, and it's tough out there.
It's been cascading. The KLM fire, I think, launched the beginning of this era of shortage. But I was down not too far from Long Beach, and just to see all those ships on the horizon just waiting, and the fact that the supply chain still is not functioning 100%, it was crazy. Nigel DeSau, your thoughts?
So a bunch of thoughts. I spent the week with our key suppliers. Those of you know, I'm in the luxury home technology installation business, and I've been trying to squeeze them for the dates. And I'll tell you, there's a couple of things going on. First of all, nobody has a good date. Second of all, people are re-engineering their products as fast as they can to use the parts they can get. So you may well start to see products hit the shelves which are downgraded function from what they were before, because they can't get the latest stuff, but they can get old stuff. The answer to how quickly can you get a fab up, the answer is 3 to 4 years. So, You know, they're complicated animals. And if you want to have an economic one, I mean, you can go and get a 90, 150 nanometer plant and move it. We mostly sold ours to Russia and China and stuff. They'll move those back within a year. But if you're talking 3, 4 nanometer, 10 nanometer plants, it's very complicated to set those up. And by the way, they mostly require equipment from providers who have lead times on them. So they can't even get the machines to design the machines. I'll give you one other factoid. EEPROMs, typically we're on a 4-week lead time. They're on a 52-week lead time. So if you think about what that means even if you can get, the parts to do the parts are a year away in some cases. Audio products will take the longest probably to get back to where they need to be.
Wow. Noah Sargent.
I also heard like the lines they have, and specifically around cars, I guess, that a lot of the cars use older chipsets, right? And so when the COVID hit and the line shut down for a lot of things, they basically started moving on to newer or smaller chips. And so when those old manufacturers picked up, they wanted the chips they used to get, and those lines shut down or moved. And so it takes like up to 18 months for those to get back into swing. So they're pushing for the smaller, newer, more efficient chips as well to be produced.
Chris Fenwick is next.
You know what there's no shortage on? Beanie Babies. I'm just saying, they're all over the place.
I wonder if that could be a supply and demand curve issue.
Ask your grandmother. Plenty of Beanie Babies. You can use them for currency in some countries in the world.
Are they still being hoarded so badly? Anyway, Nigel Dessau.
I was going to add one point about cars. In the US, the rental car agencies, when COVID hit, seemed to sell every car they could do. And so then they can't find the backfill them. I was in the UK a couple of weeks ago for a week. Let me tell you, cheapest rental car. You can get a rental car in Europe, or at least in the UK, for like half the price of the same car in the US.
Yeah, we were all shocked when they were on the phone trying to find a rental car. Literally, they were calling all of the major agencies and saying anything everywhere. I mean, the poor guy got his car stolen, so he has nothing to drive around in, and he's economically well off, so he can pay whatever the market bears, and I think his insurance is paying for it. You just can't find him. It's just crazy out there. Let's move on. John Preto has our next question from Las Vegas, Nevada. And he says, I've created a playlist on YouTube that memorializes the construction of the office hours rocket. Awesome. I noticed that the larger YouTubers don't use playlist. Is this a YouTube SEO, search engine optimization issue? And should I separate the files? Jeffrey Powers is up first.
So the biggest thing with playlists is a lot of people, they don't know, or they don't care about playlists. They're, especially some of these people, they get onto YouTube and it's like they just want to post their videos and maybe make a couple dollars after the fact. And so they're so focused on posting it, they don't know how to put it into playlists or tag or anything like that. And they slowly learn on things. There's many that use playlists for YouTube, and if you do it right, you can really have a lot of fun with it. There's a lot of things you can do, like mixing in other videos with your videos and then promoting that playlist as opposed to promoting one single video. So if you're not seeing YouTubers not use the playlists, then they're just they either have lots of views, they don't need to worry about playlists, or they just don't understand the whole infrastructure in YouTube.
Fair enough. Let's move on. Anthony Serenina in Diamond Bar, California is up next. He says, good morning and happy Friday, Office Hours panel and community. Does anyone find themselves loyal to one or two particular brands for certain equipment? For example, I stick with only Manfrotto for my camera tripods. And we've got a lot of people who want to weigh in on this, starting with Noah Sargent.
I think generally yes, because those brands and companies have earned my trust over the years, providing gear that works reliably. I used to have a method where I would buy like cheap and then use it to see if I would get value from that, and then buy the more expensive one over time. And now I just kind of go to the good stuff first. But Blackmagic, Apple, and Makita are the brands that come to mind.
Rupert McRae.
I have always had a successful relationship with Dell, and I try not to buy test equipment that is not made by Fluke.
Fair enough. Roscoe Jones.
The user interface is often common on a particular line. I love my Manfroto tripods, but that's not a user interface. The knobs are pretty easy on every tripod to find in the same place. But when you get to cameras, menus, layout of buttons, that kind of stuff, you find that manufacturers tend to follow what they've done before, and that just helps for those of us who are having to move through equipment to stay and understand how the new one's going to work better.
Fair enough. Nigel DeSalle.
A quick sweep of my head would answer Apple to that question, given that almost everything I can see in front of me has an Apple logo somewhere in it. I also did a whole bunch of work with the team this week around creating loyalty. And I would tell you that one of the people I worked with years ago believe there were two types of clients, loyalists and terrorists. And so it's also an interesting question about which of those brands will you never work with again. And I had an LG television burn in, and that's made me real nervous about LG televisions.
Courtney Gooden.
Well, I do, but I base it on utility, not snobbery. So I don't pick a brand because, hey, it's the most popular brand. Oh, the people in Hollywood are buying this brand. I pick it based on value for performance. And a lot of times, if I find something I like, I will stay with it. But I'll still, if I'm going into a new product area, I will start at the bottom and try the cheapest and see which one works the best and work my way up until I find one that provides quality and the effect I'm looking for, the value I'm looking for at the cheapest price. And that way I find a good product for a reasonable price usually. And then I stay with that.
My experience has been a little odd in that I used to be incredibly brand loyal, and my first video thing starting back, many, many years ago, I was a Sony guy in the early days, and my cameras were all Sonys, and when they started doing digital 8 and high 8, that was how kind of my graduation into doing work for money. For probably 10, maybe close to 15 years, I bought them and they always worked and I felt incredibly loyal. But then there was a shift that started happening and Sony started losing a little of their compatibility and their magic, and other brands started getting my attention. And eventually I was off Sony, and I haven't bought a Sony device in a long time. So they were able to lose it. And I can't tell you exactly why. I guess from my perspective, they just weren't keeping up with the rapid developments. They were solid in DV, but they also, when I was trying to move up, I had DV cam for a while, but then we started seeing these cameras from places like Blackmagic and other stuff start taking over. And I was able to be switched off of that loyalty profile. The other thing is that some of the brands that I used to be really solid with, they really have changed. And there was that consolidation era where some of the brands that I felt really, really good about, AT&T was one. They had handled my phones for decades, and I really was, this is a solid American company. But then when they got into that cellular kerfluffle and they actually kind of went under, and then I think it was Singular or somebody bought the brand, and I realized that the AT&T that was in my mind as the mind share was not the same company I was dealing with now. So I think it's possible for brands to go through transformations where they lose that solid reputation in the marketplace, and you have to find substitutes for them. So if I looked around the list of brands that I deal with and feel really good about now, it's a different kind of list than ones earlier in my year. They had decades with me. Now I think if I can get 4 or 5 years out of something, I'm considering myself pretty lucky for that. Chris Fenwick has a thought, and then we're going to come back to Courtney and then finish up.
I think brand loyalty is very important. And when it comes to my Beanie Babies, I accept nothing but Thai. Magic move in keynote, people, for the win.
Courtney Gooden.
Well, I think you can get 5 Beanie Babies for one of my Cabbage Patch dolls. Oh. No. What I wanted to say is be careful about buying brands, because as companies grow and go up and down and become bankrupt, unscrupulous companies buy their trademark. And you can get well-known trademarks like Bell & Howell or Polaroid or things like that are now just cheap junk that these large investment companies bought the brand name and are now just putting out products that don't adhere to the old company's value and quality standards because they just bought the name. So be
I went through that
careful
with
about
Marantz. Marantz was my gold standard of amplifiers and things like that back in my stereo days. And then they went through a transition, and suddenly they were just a midline brand that did not have anywhere near the quality control that they had in the earlier days. So it's a tough thing out there. I think we're all trying to struggle with, finding the right vendors and learning to trust and having them take care of us the way that some of these old brands did. Let's move on. Jason Panks in Nashville has our next question. He says, in a Zoom webinar, is there a way to check audio and video before allowing all the attendees in? And Rupert McRae is going to start us.
So for a Zoom webinar, when you set up the webinar or schedule it, you can enable the practice session feature, which will allow the host to pre-start the webinar into a practice session state. That does mean that you will have to predefine your panelists so that they can also join, because they won't be able to join as attendees and you promote them because the real doors aren't open yet. So if you enable the practice session, that will at least allow you to get your panelists in, and then you'll ideally want to go through a kind of mic check process that similar to how we do it here. So if you have meters to bring in, that's great, like we have here. But if you don't, then I would advise having what I am now going to call a reliable witness, somebody who can facilitate this for you, who's offsite and is a sort of surrogate audience member that can witness and give you feedback on how all your panelists' audio is sounding. It needs to be somebody independent and needs to be offsite ideally. So then they are hearing something indicative of what the audience is about to hear when they come in.
All right, Brant Kruger has our next question out of Minneapolis, Minnesota. And Brant says, has a situation where it made sense to come off more like the everyman instead of a metaphorical 6-foot Norwegian model, and he had a situation like this, and took a call from my couch on a laptop cam. Anyone else occasionally find the need to dress down for a call or a meeting? Interesting question. Let's start with Roscoe Jones.
Yeah, it's an ongoing question in education because students are oftentimes embarrassed about where their living conditions are. And so we've talked about this a lot on the Education Hour. I'm going to come into this because for the next 2 weeks, my university's gone virtual. So we're going to figure that one out again. But that's just one situation where not coming across as, totally perfect and letting students feel more comfortable with everybody in the panel.
Guy Cochran.
Yeah, I really like having a Portal Plus in my kitchen that I can use. And so I've noticed that if I come in looking like this into certain meetings, it's almost like, oh, you must be here to speak as well. And so you're almost overpowering the speakers or the person whose event it is. So I try to either turn off my blue light that I have here and it's still super sharp, like it's just noticeably radically different if you get side by side or you're switching back and forth between people. But yeah, the Portal, the other nice thing is it's 720p. It bumps other people's meetings to 720p. So if I know I'm going into a low res meeting, I'll use my Portal just to bump the meeting and let everybody have a better experience.
Chris Fenwick's next.
Yeah, I was in a production meeting with another production company, and we're both working on the same show. And I had my earbuds in, which my battery died this morning. And I turned to do something, and one of their producers, he goes, "Are you wearing molded in-ears?" I said, "No, they're just foam tips." He's like, and then it was like it opened up the floodgates. So what camera are you? And it was this whole thing, and I think it's really important to always put your best foot forward. I think it's I always tease Alex about, his guilt and shame strategy, guilt and shame people into doing better. Oh, really? Is that what you're going to do, Noah? You're going to have your black levels that high? Okay. Well, it's like, but I think that bring it down like 2 IRE. No. But it made a difference. And these guys were like, ugh, we got to step up our game. And I think it helps. It helps. Just a little bit of poison in the world, good poison, to encourage people to take this a little bit more seriously. And I said to him, I go, dude, I sit here for 10 hours a day. Why wouldn't I do it a little better if I can? And I can, so I should.
Rupert McRae.
The challenge is that when things get stepped down a notch, then the chances of getting into the problematic areas of Wi-Fi, bad audio, and all these things start getting higher and higher. And those are the things that we know to be fatiguing. So if, sometimes there are these best effort situations where it may suit the need, but let's just remember that if too much of that happens, then we are going to get dropouts and bad audio and open speakers, and then the whole thing is just going to become untenable.
Noah Sargent.
Yeah, I'm pretty much with Chris Fenwick on this for sure. The one thing I'll do occasionally, though, I have a boom overhead, so I'll swing out the microphone so it's just me. But pretty much every client in the last 6 months that I've jumped on for a Zoom call, the first thing they do is they ask about the video. And then, friends and family people I talk to on Zoom, they're like, oh yeah, you're a video guy. Of course your stuff looks great. So that's a good bar to set. And yeah, I'm always tweaking and doing stuff. That's why there's a change in that black level. Chris, thanks.
If I can close this up, there's a thing in voiceover, because I've been doing that for most of my career. And for the beginning of my career, I was cast a lot as the young guy, and that was good. I fit in. Usually there would be somebody else doing the announcer role. As I progressed through my career and my voice got better, I found myself being cast as the announcer, and I got a lot of work through the mid part of my career being the announcer guy. And then suddenly I ran into a wall, and they stopped calling as much, and nobody wanted an announcer. They wanted authenticity. They wanted the guy next door. And so I literally had a period of about 3 years when I had to retrain myself away from sounding like an announcer and more like just somebody. I had to have that new style because the industry wanted something that I wasn't providing to them. Right now, the bulk of people who come on to Zoom calls in general look pretty bad. And there's often all of those horrible circumstances that we've seen, like virtual backgrounds that cause a third of their face to melt away. And, they're in front of the bright window, and their presentation really is, by any rational measures, substandard. I think a lot of people forgive that, and they're okay with it in corporate because they understand that everybody got thrown into this and that nobody was an expert at this. But we've been doing this for a couple of years now. And honestly, if you haven't taken the time to at least get your virtual presentation game up to at least decent standards, I think it kind of starting to show that you don't really care about that. And that's fine. If that's the player you want to be, okay. And maybe that works in your corporate circumstance. Maybe it's like, I wear black t-shirts because I came out of the production world, and in backstage you always wore show black, and I've got a bunch of them. And I also didn't want to have to mess with deciding what to wear every day. But at some point, if I'm going out, I'm not wearing this because I want to show up a little nicer for my friends and things like that. And that's the other dynamic. Our presentation, and Alex has talked about this since the beginning of the show here, we're trying to model how well you could do this, because this is something that could be a big deal for the rest of our lives. So by what he calls upping your game constantly, we are trying to model that for the rest of the industry, because in the long run, the ability to do the kind of shows that we do, where you look good and you sound good, and all of those friction points that make it hard to listen to a show like this for a long time, they start to fall away, and you are just more concentrated on the content that the panelists in our case, or the presenters in other cases, are sending out. And that's really where you want to get to, at least in my opinion. Rupert Mixpre has another thought before we move on.
I was just going to add that, in corporate or any kind of institutional, setting where there's some structure or some, behind it, is that, you have to take everybody's circumstances into account, of course, but some of the circumstances to be taken into account is there's an accessibility consideration here also. If you have a group setting where not everybody is clear and able to be seen and to be heard, that might be a problem for other people trying to participate in that meeting who have some accessibility provision. And so we can talk about how much it suits our needs to not put the best foot forward, but it has an impact. It may well have an impact on other participants in the meeting, and that will become, I think, a bigger corporate concern, and the concern of other institutions like that have to take into account the overall well-being of the group as a whole.
Yeah, I take your point. And not only that, but I think it is important to understand that not everybody can invest in the kind of thing that many people here on the panel have. A lot of us have spent thousands, if not $10,000 on a gear and lighting and everything to maximize our presentation as much as we can. I think cameras and laptops are getting better, and technique, having enough light on your face, being close enough to the microphone on your laptop if you're having to do that. You can eliminate most of the negatives by just paying attention and not having to spend a lot of money. So if you're not at least getting to there, then that's where I start to see that you're not really trying very hard. That's different than I can't afford to, because everybody should have access to this on an equal footing.
An Ethernet cable and earbuds cost dollars.
Yeah, true. All right, let's move on. We've dealt with this a lot, but it's an interesting topic, and I think the show idea has always been inclusivity. We want to try to get as many people as possible across the spectrum to be able to participate in this kind of thing as well as possible. Anthony Serena in Diamond Bar, California is next. I would eventually like to be on the panel. Well, come on. Would a Shure MV7 mic camera from the late 2015 iMac, which is 720p, and a dimmable ring light be adequate enough? And we're going to have everybody. Let's go ahead. Nigel, you start out.
You were probably going to say what I was going to say, which is we have this thing called after hours. And, the answer is it depends. And the best way to find out whether it depends is yes, jump on after hours and see what happens and have people help you and work it out and see what you look like.
Absolutely. Courtney's next.
Of your equipment list there, the first thing I'd upgrade would be the camera. That 720 camera built into the iMac, the frame of that iMac is not very adjustable. You have to adjust the angle of the screen, and so a lot of times to frame it correctly, you might have glare in your screen, etc. A Logitech minimum would be like a 920S, and Brio would be the preferred camera to stick on the top of that iMac. But the ring light should be fine for you, and that's a good microphone that a lot of people on the panel here use. And so I think you'll do fine with the microphone. Just have to upgrade that camera a little bit.
Moving on to Rupert McRae.
I think we have seen people come in and produce some good results with some surprising equipment, and it would certainly be easy to have a lot more equipment and mess it up. I think it's all about the right.
Amen to that.
Right, it's all about how you can tune it. So I agree, come into after hours and just run through it and try and get the best out of it and go from there.
Yeah, after hours really is for if you're listening out there and you've never stopped into after hours, you really should, because it's an amazing place for 22 hours a day when we're not on the air here. That is up and running, and it is a little analog of the show. There's a panel, and you can pop into it and raise your hand, but there's nobody except for the participants watching, so you don't have an audience like we often do here on Office Hours. So it's a great place to test out things, and also just to kind of dip your toes in the community. Very, very nice people, and you'll find, I think, a warm welcome there. So it's highly recommended. Roscoe had some thoughts.
It's also like the Wild Wild West. So come in multiple times, because sometimes you may come and see one thing and it may not appeal to you, but then you'll come back and you go, oh, this is a great conversation going on. I'd love to just listen in. So
yeah, very good point.
Samples.
Yeah, sometimes you pop into Office Hours and three genius experts are talking about something so technical that I am totally lost. It's fascinating to listen to when that's happening, but it's not like that 24/7. And if you get into a quiet moment, you can ask even the best questions, which are the dumbest, you'll feel are the dumbest questions, because often revisiting those simple things again allow people to approach them different ways and get better at even the simple things. Let's move on. Douglas Carmichaels is next. Douglas says, when utilizing that is the next one. Okay. Douglas Carmichael, when utilizing a high-power electrical installation on show site or on set, would there just be an electrician on set, or would there be assistants and staff under said electricians? So, Roscoe, you want to start this off? And I'm surprised Courtney.
I would hope for a master electrician, because you really don't want to be messing around with set safety. Oftentimes what's going on the set is so different from day to day that you really need somebody who's watching over at a very high level everything that's going on. So I put in a definition in the links in Mukana of what a journeyman versus a master electrician is. I'm sure the industry and Courtney will have a few maybe more defined stuff.
Yeah, Noah and Courtney are both in line, and I think Courtney will be able to talk to us about the many classifications in Hollywood, particularly having to do with gaffers and best boys and all the rest of the technical things about who can do what. But let's start with Noah Sargent.
Yeah, and also on those Hollywood sets, you have a rigging crew or riggers that come out. So you have a rigging electrician, and so their team lays out most of those things, especially on like a stage production where everything's built out beforehand. But maybe Courtney has more insight on that.
Yeah, Courtney, you want to talk a little bit about how it works?
Well, if you're shooting at a location, usually on a professional shoot, they'll bring in their own generator. And usually the gaffer has a generator operator who's a licensed electrician, of course, who operates the generator, makes sure it stays on frequency and filled with diesel fuel or gasoline, whichever it's using. And if you're working where you're tying in to the mains at a location, you do need a licensed electrician. Must be done for tying in. That is, I've seen cases where someone, just a flunky electrician, non-union electrician, has tried to tie in and set off dancing green lights all up and down the high voltage lines as they shorted out the input transformer to that particular house. So you do have to be very careful and make sure you have someone who's licensed and knows what they're doing and knows the difference between three-phase and single-phase, etc., before they tie in, because you can not only be a danger to the health and safety of anyone who's hooking into that electricity, but it can also blow up all of your equipment and cause you to shut down a transformer, which will take the whole neighborhood out for several hours. So,
yeah. Plus, sometimes those, remember those long credit rolls at the end of movies? You see, what's a best boy? A lot of those kind of positions are actually part of these electrical crews, and they're very regimented. And those positions have a lot of meaning as to what you are allowed to do on the set, what you're expected to do. And so, safety, I think, anytime you're using large lights and you have a lot of power running around, safety becomes the number one criteria, because it's really easy to make a simple mistake and cause a lot of damage or loss of life. Let's move on. Douglas Carmichael has our next question. He says, I've heard that interfacing synthesizers via USB MIDI can create ground loop hum. Has anyone experienced that, and how could you mitigate the issue? And Courtney's going to come back on this one.
Well, it depends. If you also have audio connections besides the USB cable that goes to give you your MIDI, that might be where your hum is coming from. The solution to that is to ground the case of the synthesizer, find a metal screw that goes into the metal case on the synthesizer, or attach a wire. Make sure if you're using analog connections with an XLR plug, make sure the XLR plug or the shield of the quarter-inch jack is tied to the shield or the case of your computer even with a separate wire. So you run the ground across the two, so the two are sharing a common ground. The other possibility, if you're running into a laptop, is a lot of laptops are floating from the ground, so you might want to run a ground wire, if you can find a metal place on a laptop, to your synthesizer to eliminate a ground loop hum, or lift the grounds off of your if you have a three wire plug that's powering that synthesizer, you might try lifting the ground, and that might eliminate a ground loop hum as well. In other words,
yeah, most of these things are going to be working on low voltage stuff. I mean, this is music signals, not passing along power, so ground lifting probably isn't as dangerous as it is with that if you're doing that with lights and things, which is a very bad idea. Everybody will tell you, not the right time to pull out those nippers and cut the ground pin off of the AC power strip thing. That's a super bad idea. Let's move on. Stefan Fischer in Würzburg, Germany comes up next. He says the input level of the two USB channels coming from Zoom into my Mixpre 6 seems to be fairly high, touching -12 regularly. Is that due to our -20 level? And Guy Cochran wants to address that.
Yeah, it looks like that's what I'm getting on mine as well. If it's too hot for you, like I have mine set on 1 and 2, so of course you can just turn it down. You can also adjust the gain. So here you would turn that up and down, and then also you can create a custom headphone preset if you have other issues where you want to adjust that to your liking for certain mics on certain channels. So jump into After Hours and we can walk you through if you want to play with these headphone presets and make a custom one.
Perfect. Let's move on to Chris Widener in Lafayette, Indiana. Chris says, I've seen a couple workarounds for the notification problem in the new Mac OS. Does that bug also affect decklink outputs or just desktop displays? I have not experienced that. I don't know about it. Does anybody else on the panel have any experience with some notification problem? I've been watching generally on the internet, but I haven't seen a lot of Mac related stuff. Noah Sargent has the thought.
Yeah, for decklink outputs specifically, they have to go through some sort of software. So if that's like OBS or another program that emulates that output, so you would see it if you screen shared through that program, but if you just set like a full screen output, in theory, you should not have that same issue. I haven't tested it myself though.
Yeah, I have a general rule, having been in Macs for decades and decades. I see problems on the internet occasionally in the bulletin board systems and the communities that I visit, and I try to figure out what percentage of the people are talking about this problem. You'll see a post, and then you'll see maybe 5 or 6 people below that reacting to it. That to me is probably an issue that deals with one person. When I start seeing multiple posts, and particularly over multiple days, with a problem that I think, this is probably a system problem as opposed to a configuration problem for one person. This is not always true, and it is possible that you have stumbled upon an actual bug that needs to be reported and fixed. But in my just experience over all these decades of working around these computers, there's a difference between an actual bug and something that's not working right for you in your configuration. And there's just so many possible configurations that the first thing I try to do is figure out, is this general or is this just my rig and maybe there's something that I've got going on? It's hard to figure out. So hopefully you can find some solution to that, and Noah's tips will give you a little leg up on it. Let's move on to Brent Kruger in Minneapolis, Minnesota, who says, been playing around with the keyboard mouse server Synergy on Mac, but the problem is power up before the client is running. How are those that use this getting around the need for a keyboard at power up and log on? And Guy Cochran has thoughts.
So I use this little device right here, and it has a push button. So I have my Mac on 2 and it needs to be restarted. I actually have to physically click this to get Synergy because Synergy is running on my PC. So on 1, basically if my PC's off, I can't use Synergy. I have a dead keyboard and mouse. So I actually physically spent, $66 to install this thing. And then I just push this button once and then I'm over to my Mac. I enter in my login information and then I'm able to cruise along. So I'd get one of those and then your problems will be solved.
Excellent response. Good. Hopefully that takes care of Brent. Chris Widener in Lafayette, Indiana has our next query. He says, does anyone have a good wireless mic recommendation for using Zoom on the iPad with USB-C? The Rode Go-To plugged in disables the AirPods and defaults back to its speaker out. Does anybody use iPad with USB-C and wireless mic systems? This one's a little bit tough because we keep migrating through these standards, and you'll find a lot of devices for USB-A, and then when they move to a new standard, there will be quite a few of them. And I don't use the Rode Go-To, so I don't have any direct experience with this. Roscoe seems to have popped in with a thought.
I haven't tested it on an iPad. The Rode also makes a device which has both an input and an output on it. You could then run your Rode Go in through that device and use it because it does have the output coming out that connector, but then the output would be hardwired. So you'd have to come up with a way. It's not going to work with AirPods if it's going to cancel out the AirPod signal, but it's a potential. But then you're having all kinds of dongle after dongle. There's a point of failure when you add too many devices.
Yeah, and the AirPods are Bluetooth. I wonder, that's interesting that it would disable the Bluetooth. Is the signal to the Bluetooth? That seems a little odd to me that the AirPods wouldn't be a separate circuit in there. Yeah, sorry, it looks like that's the best we can do in terms of that. Maybe try a little bit more and see if there's something new that comes up. We're going to move on to Noah Sargent's question from Fullerton, California. In my house of worship, our pastor asked if we could have a TV on stage so we could have something to point at. I've recommended using an iPad with AirPlay and Apple TV and then the HDMI out into the video switcher onto the screens. Is this the best method? And Sky Gleason has some thoughts on that.
We just had that meeting last night, and the question is it a prop? Is it an illustration? So Noah, how is he expecting it to help move his message further? What is it? Is it do you have any more description?
Sure.
Noah?
Yeah, I mean, I think he's going to point at either images or use it to illustrate something or like show something. That's why I was thinking like dictation or like writing on it might do the same thing, but I'll have to follow up to get more details.
Yeah, because we used to have big, bullet, pieces of paper up there. So again, who is your audience? What do you want them to do is my mantra. Consequently, is he doing it just for the camera? Or is it a hybrid experience where you've got people from
Hybrid, yeah.
You've got a 180 experience. I don't know if it's in the theater in the round, if it's straight on columns of people. So those are all challenges. I don't know if you've got the big screens up on the that you sing from and follow the dancing music. So consequently, you've got a lot of options there. So it sounds you're going to have to try some things, but an iPad feels too small unless you're just zooming in on a camera, and that camera is what's also being shown up in the big monitors, and then that's the big monitors is what's going out to the YouTube experience. So
Courtney has some thoughts.
What moves the story forward is the question.
I'd avoid using any kind of wireless or Bluetooth connection in a public place because it's too easy for someone to pull out their iPhone and pair with that Apple TV that's hooked up to the big monitor and put their stuff up on the screen. So I would use wired connections between the screen and if you're using an iPad, take an HDMI out into a switcher and the output of the switcher wired directly into the monitor. Using AirPlay may work fine in a situation, in a non-hybrid situation, in a virtual only, where there's nobody else around. They could pair with that Apple TV, but it's fairly dangerous in a public place where there's miscreants around.
Roscoe Jones has a thought.
We have all our classrooms on Apple TVs, and so you make sure you invoke the conference room pin so that it has to be a 4-pin that before the person can grab on and display stuff on that. That's one way to work around that. But if it's publicly displayed, then their pin's going to be showing up too. So it's kind of one of those, make sure. I've actually been through this transition where the tech crew handed an Apple iPad to the pastor, hooked it all up through Apple TV, went through this, and make sure that you get a lot of practice in. And this is a very technically sophisticated pastor, because I guarantee you, things don't go smoothly. It looks very bad when things don't go smoothly. I strongly recommend you have somebody in the booth driving what's being seen on that display behind the pastor.
Sounds like great advice. Rupert McRae has another thought.
Yeah, I agree with Roscoe about having a second pair of hands. If you need to provide remote support in real time, you've got to have somebody behind the scenes able to get onto that thing. But when you were talking about like actually collaborating on something, drawing on something, maybe I was visualizing a Zoom room. I don't know whether you're doing the thing in Zoom, but I now just wonder how that might work in that environment in your hybrid, house of worship, whether you could have a Zoom room type setup in there. I'm not sure. It may just be a different use case.
Let's move on to Andy Kirkendorfer's question from Vieira, Florida. He says, what filter do you prefer for interview recordings? Black Pro Mist, Hollywood Black Magic, which grades? Quarter, half, or 1? Stop, thanks, and then let's deal. Noah Sargent starts out first.
Yeah, this is a fun one. I feel like filters, you can go down the rabbit hole and find all sorts of fun stuff. At the end of the day, for me, I realized that 9 times out of 10, or really 95 out of 100, I guess you could say, I did not do any sort of filtering. I felt like it distracted more than helped, and it kind of pulled away from it. But if I did use something, it would be like a quarter mist, something like that.
Guy Cochran.
Yeah, in the DV days, we used to really recommend the Tiffin Soft Effects 3 because some of the DV cameras were so in-your-face sharp that it was almost overbearing. So to get more of a film-like look, to reduce that contrast and that sharpness, you would get a Soft Effects. I actually made a video a long time ago that showed, and not all these filters are created equal. So remember, the strength of a Black Mist quarter is different than the Soft Effects 3. So it's the numbers aren't the same based on the models. It's totally different. But yeah, I like shooting with them for product demos, especially because there's certain glints and glares that you can get with the lighting, because you get these happy accidents, I call them, as you're starting to move a light around. All of a sudden you get this specular highlight that really blooms with a filter on. And if you take the filter off and you put it on, and it can add some magic. So for people live, if you've ever watched newscasters where it's like, man, you could see the makeup in the pores, a Black Pro Mist or a Soft Effects, maybe a 2, 3 and 4 are just too much. Like it starts to look blurry. So you want to be careful with them. But there's some videos on YouTube now that are updated that have the diffusion effects and some of these other Hollywood effects. I have a bunch of them, and it's seasoned to taste. It just depends on the shoot.
There you go. Courtney Gooden.
Yeah, I agree with Guy. If you're doing live, you may want to use a filter. If not doing live, I would not do any filtration, because it's gotten to where in post-production, the virtual filters that you can add in post-production do as good a job, and you have much more control over them, because once you put too heavy a filter on in production, you can't really undo it very easily. So I'd leave that for post if it's not a live production where you can't apply a virtual filter.
I feel the same way about it. I will say that I was just reading before I got on the show this morning about Canon's new R-series camera that's now up to 8K. And so you're going to buy filters for what you have now, and they're going to work with what you have now. But boy, you put a filter that's designed for one resolution camera, is it going to translate over to the next resolution as they keep getting better and better? Our cameras are going to keep changing. And I agree with Courtney that the post-processing filter equivalents, we're getting more and more compute power that can do those kinds of things in post. I will say that sometimes you have a circumstance maybe with an older person and they're highly sensitive to wrinkles and things like that. And so if you can find gentle filtering to do on camera, that can be nice for them. But once you put a filter in front of the lens, every shot you have going through is going to have that correction on it. There's no way to get rid of it once you put it on there. So my default is to start without, and then only in those circumstances where I think, I really don't ever want to see this go out with as much resolution as it had originally. That's where I would look at using a filter. Let's move on. Stefan Fischer, Würzburg, Germany. And he says, I learned that the device to fire an active monitor speaker is called a monitor controller. What are the panel's recommendations? Do we have anybody who wants to chat about a device to fire an active monitor speaker? Roscoe Jones.
Well, I actually sorry to say, I use my old mixing boards as basically that function. In my mind, a monitor controller, and I may be wrong here, is the person on stage can actually determine what's coming into their headphones. They can, change their mix a little bit if they want a little more of the female vocals and that kind of stuff. So give them control over what they're actually hearing. And that's when he says active monitors in an editing situation, obviously those types of things aren't quite as necessary. So I just use old mixing boards.
Yeah, there has been a trend in the past 10 years away from passive speakers to active monitors, particularly in studio circumstances. On my meter bridge up here, I have dual active JBL monitors. One thing that you can do with them is then split the settings a little bit. If your monitors are positioned in somewhere where you have a little less response out of the left side than the right side, adding a little more gain on that speaker that's a little diminished can balance them more. So that used to be done by a balance control on a stereo amplifier or something like that. We don't have to do that much anymore. And once you get them set, then what actually determines the amount of sound coming out is typically some other control in your system. A lot of us use these external pieces of equipment. I have a Universal Audio Apollo Solo that is now the monitor level control for the monitor system. If I turn it to that or I switch it to my headphones, that one audio control will be determining the gain that I or the people sitting behind me hear. So but there's an almost infinite number of those devices that can control an external powered speaker, including just the default Zoom controls or your laptop controls. If you're tapping out of your laptop into active speakers, sometimes just your keyboard can control the level. So it's a universal thing. So it's just, I think, that idea of a monitor controller is because we've changed, and we've changed from stereos with a passive speaker active amplifier and perhaps active preamp world has now changed into laptops determining the audio signal going out, and then any balance or anything you want to do with the speakers has to happen at the speakers. So I think that's why they've gone in that direction. Did Courtney? Courtney, you wanted to hop in on that?
I just wasn't sure whether they're talking about open speaker monitors or monitors, inner monitors for stage performance. Typically, and a lot of times, a separate monitor mixer is involved for doing the stage mix for the musicians on stage, who are listening either through monitor wedges placed in front of them, or in-ear monitors more and more these days. Also, if you're just a single mixer, you can use aux outs as an aux bus as your monitor mix, and so you pull the aux out of your main board, and that you can control the individual levels on each of your inputs into that monitor mix, which then drives an active set of speakers to whatever level you need.
I also think design-wise, active speakers became really popular because the engineers who were designing the speakers would understand the efficiency of the drivers they have in there and match a power amplifier inside the speaker to the needs of those speakers, as opposed to always having to start out with a big amplifier and then not knowing the efficiency of the speakers on the other side and have it be capable of driving anything you hooked up to it. So it's just change in style. Let's move on. Idris Hagig of Fairfax, Virginia comes up next. School Zoom presentation question. When Blackmagic camera, 2 wireless mics, and mobile accessories, tripod and sort of, etc., which of those things would you recommend for presentation in a hard surface room? So school presentation, hard surface room, what basic equipment? And we talk about this a good little bit, and we got one of the experts on the panel, Guy Cochran, who does this all the day long.
I didn't see the word basic in there. I think you just added that because
did I?
I was going to say, no, there's no budget, so the sky's the limit, right?
Okay, wow, here you go.
I'm going to jump over to Sky's show where, he has a lot of this stuff that we wound up putting together. I believe he had the Blackmagic 4K with he'll have to refresh my memory out with what lens. So for a B camera, though, we wound up using my 6K with a 20-120. That's the big, monster. Let me see if I can grab that real quick. So, with no budget or sky's the limit budget, 20-120. And then for audio, we wound up at first using a DP or a pile, which turned out to be I can't say it, clean show. So we wound up switching to a DPA headboard microphone, and we were feeding that into a Mixpre. So those are a couple devices. You can jump into the Discord, and there's a lot of these photos, and you can go through and you can kind of see how we were able to put together a show with Sky and some basic lights. I mean, maybe Sky will raise his hand and jump in here a little bit to talk about his lights, his camera, because I believe that was a 4K, and we had 2 4Ks and then a studio camera. So, and then a switcher. We started with the basic ATEM, and then we wound up with the Pro. But yeah, lots of options.
He didn't specify a budget, but he didn't also say they had a bond issue. I was gonna support this. Roscoe Jones has some thoughts.
The one piece of equipment I didn't see in your list is an ATEM switcher, and I would put that in as soon as you're doing a presentation. It gives the ability to show somebody on camera and then immediately switch to a graphic that they may be talking about, or key it over, or put a title, all those kind of things. So anytime you're talking school presentations, I think that's a great little tool. At that point in time, I'm going to go low budget. I'm going to say do buy the ISO. I know it's $895 versus the $295 ATEM Mini, but at least get to the ISO. And then I would go ahead and go with the Blackmagic. Even a 4K camera is perfectly legit because you're only looking at a 1080p signal feeding into that ATEM. And then manfroto tripods and wireless mics. I would go with if you need wireless, I would go with the Rode Go. What are they? Rode Pro Go? Rode Go Pro?
GoPro 2. Rode Pro 2. Pro 2s, yeah.
Get the two transmitters. So. Get the 2 transmitters. I'll stop there.
Sky Gleason's next.
Well, the term FOG FOG, friend of Guy, was a thing that I had no idea I was, and Guy just showed up with his magical Jeep Grand Cherokee grip truck and amazing pieces of unicorn equipment just kept pouring out, and I didn't know how to use it to begin with. What we started with was talent, and then we just kept assembling and breaking things and testing things, and it was very challenging, but you can do things very simply. What we did have was, yes, I had again, equipment that I bought from Guy was the 4K, Blackmagic with the Sigma, and we also had what's the smaller Blackmagic little hockey puck camera?
It's the micro studio camera.
We had a micro studio camera mounted up in the ceiling. Thank you to Alex Lindsay for that. And then another Eric Hall loaned us 2 additional cameras, another 4K. And then, yes, Guy brought in just amazing pieces of equipment. We did end up with the, again, continued additional equipment, the Sennheiser, the DBA mic, and we just had the 4 ATEM, but yes, we did go up to the ISO again. That was on loan. So we were gifted a lot of opportunities to experiment with other people's equipment. And by show 8, yeah, we had a show that we were consistently really good at, but we easily brought that equipment in as we were able, and as other humans, Mark, a couple of different other humans were able to start managing that. And then Guy continued to push the envelope. Every week was bringing another piece of magic that he allowed us to test with.
I'm going to break in here before we get to Noah, Courtney, and Stefan, and we will get you right afterwards. I was just rereading the question, and I'm not sure whether this is a hybrid, whether this is something they want for in-room presentation, or whether they want to take their in-room presentation and broadcast it out on the internet. I could see any of this going any of those directions, and that may have a particular spin to add to it, particularly that last line, recommend for presentation in a hard surface room. That would indicate to me that you are looking at presenting to a classroom, maybe of live people, and want to keep the feedback into the mic suppressed. So just keep those things in mind as we go through. Noah, you had some thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple things that haven't been mentioned yet. You might consider getting a rug, like an 8x10 or something, to just help capture some of that sound. Habitat for Humanity sells some fairly inexpensive ones that are fairly large as well. For HDMI cables, right, going from the Blackmagic camera to the switcher, try to keep that under 25 feet, especially if you're unplugging and replugging it. Those cables will wear out pretty fast. And then finally, as far as tripods go, Manfroto is a decent brand. I've actually discovered this Prompter People tripod. It's a 100mm ball head, and the arm extends as well. So I found that this is actually a better bang for your buck. It's currently on sale. It has been on sale for a while. So I did a review of this tripod and its bigger brother. So this one can take up to 30 pounds. The bigger brother can do up to 50 pounds. And so my church has 4 of these, and I have 4 of the larger ones, and they have done great for me.
And those might be very useful if you have teleprompters, particularly large teleprompters, if you want to run that. Even the 75mm tripods do well for something the Blackmagic camera size. But Courtney Gooden has some thoughts.
Well, if you want to knock down the reflection in the room, you could get some C-stands and moving blankets or furniture pads to hang up on them. Make them into a T shape and some clamps. Stick those up on your reflective walls, especially if you have any whiteboards that are not in the shot, that are parallel to any windows or anything like that. The other thing you might look into for demonstrations is a copy stand and a separate camera, so that you have a separate camera pointing down if you're using any old school books or anything that the teacher wants to show illustrations of, or any small items that they need to see close-ups of. You can stick it underneath the copy stand camera and cut to it using that ATEM that was mentioned earlier.
Idris, I hope that gives you some ideas. There's a lot of variation in what you're trying to do, and a lot of people have been doing this for the last couple of years as we've dealt with this hybrid classroom, in the classroom, out of the classroom. COVID's coming through. We have to change everything before class starts on Monday kind of thing. So hopefully, and continue to come back, ask as specific questions as you can as you develop this. And the Office Hours crew here on the show itself, because there's a lot of other people watching, probably in the same circumstance you are, or the After Hours crew, which will help you individually. Great resources. So thanks for stopping by. Eduardo Agustin is next out of Panama, and he says, how big of a group can we handle in one system with Zoom's webinars features? Rupert McRae is going to deal with this.
So I just wanted to clarify the system terminology. The overall capacity of a webinar will be defined by the size of the license. I mean, they start at 500 attendees and go up in increments and price from there. But in terms of how many participants or attendees rather you could in a webinar you can manage from a single computer, your gallery view will provide you up to 49, a view of 49, but that's on the panel. You're not going to see your attendees, but you can see up to 49, I believe, in panel view if your computer, if the system meets the system requirements for 49. Otherwise, it's going to be 25 in view. But really, in terms of managing a webinar and how many people you can manage, it takes hands. You've got to have a team of people to support large numbers of users in terms of co-hosting functions and just herding those cats.
Herding cats. That's one of my favorite idioms because we've all been there. We're going to move on to the Noah Sargent question because it's going to be fun. Has anybody pre-ordered the Cybertruck? And do you know where you are in line? So, it has cyber in the name, so we're going to consider it fair game for our technology show. Roscoe Jones starts off.
Yes and no. And I do know I'm second in line because the model I ordered is not going to be the first one they produce. It's a 4-wheel drive, so it's going to be the second round of issuance. So until I start to see the first round come out, I know I'm not going to see anything.
Okay, Noah Sargent.
Nice. That's interesting. Yeah, I also pre-ordered the Cybertruck. I'll answer this my own question, but Cybertruck ownersclub.com. You can go to that website and put in your reservation number, and then it'll give you an estimated position in line. So I'm 529,000-ish in line for the tri-motor. Yeah.
Nigel DeSalle.
No, I don't need one, but if I didn't need one even more, I would probably go for the Rivian.
Yeah, the Rivian looks interesting. Courtney Gooden has a thought.
Well, if you want to order, it's only $100, so no wonder there are 587,000 orders in, and he's probably made a lot of money off the pre-orders,
Interesting. Noah Sargent has another thought.
Yeah, there's estimated like 1.2 million reservations at this point for the Cybertruck.
Ooh, Roscoe Jones.
I think that Ford Lightning looks real interesting too. So, it's $100. You'll get your money back if you decide to buy something else.
Let's have a little conversation about this though. So what was the killer thing that caused you to think this is the one? And let's start with Roscoe, then Noah, then Nigel, then Courtney. Roscoe, what was it?
It was a good show. They put on a great show.
You just like the show.
It's a show. It looks cool. It's I don't know if I'm going to date myself here, but when the Ford Tauruses first came out, they put all kinds of articles in popular mechanics magazines, how interesting and stuff like that. It's just new technology, and it's fascinating to just see how it develops. I really, to be honest, haven't been tracking where they're at in production or development, but it's just an interesting thing to buy into.
Interesting. Noah, where are you in this?
Oh man, I could talk about this for hours. For me, it was all about the calculation for gas. So I drive a Ram 1500. I pull a trailer. So when I am on the highway with the trailer, it's 14 miles to the gallon. And without the trailer, it's actually like 28, which is the best in class for that. So I did a 20-year calculation. It would cost me about $80,000 in diesel if the price did not go up, right? And so obviously prices are going to go up over 20 years. And the Cybertruck, for the one I wanted, was around $80,000. So I figured it would pay for itself over that lifespan, plus of all the other things that I won't mention right now.
Nigel, if you were not going to not order one and you were going to, what's the...
Yeah, so I'm not an early adopter. I find them very late in the cycle for me. I'm an innovator, the top 2% of idiots who buy things only to wish I didn't. I think that I have a Tesla X and I love it, and its range is plus or minus 300 miles. And I think the reality for me is the next vehicle I'm going to do is probably going to have to be closer to 500 to 600 miles. Because, I've learned living in America that, a 300-mile journey is not a bad day. A 600-mile journey is really a long day. And I think the next jump for those type of owners is as we can do 600 days. I also live in an apartment block, so the idea of turning up with a Cybertruck, one of these things which I really don't need just to shock my neighbors, it may be enough to encourage me to do it.
Having grown up in Phoenix, which is 250 miles from any place, if you're taken off to another city, that always bothered me. Courtney, do you have a last thought before we move on?
I have a plug-in hybrid, so I never have range anxiety. It's got a 500-mile range on it, combined in HEV and electric. So I never worry about that. If I had the Cybertruck, I think it'd be great for driving under the side of trucks because you could wedge it up under the flip 'em over.
I wonder if they've adapted the jaws of life to open that up. All right, let's move on. We're just having fun now. And we're going to move to the Andy Wagner question in Brooklyn, New York. And he says, has anyone sent multiple live streams to a single Facebook page simultaneously? For example, one stream in English and one in French with the viewer able to pick their language, I guess, on the feed. Has anybody gone through that? Multiple live streams to a single Facebook page. Why wouldn't you be able to have a Facebook page with two portals on it? Oh no, it's a live stream. So I guess you really would have to do a language substitution. Be interesting. I don't know how to do that. So I think you're going to stump us for this morning. So sorry about that, Andy. Come back on a different day and try something, and let's see if we get better luck there. Ray Harwood in Avondale, Arizona says, is the Office Hours rocket launch team planning any educational sessions other than live coverage of the launch? The Girl Scouts of Arizona program staff are interested in it for STEM education promotion. Well, thank you. That's awesome. Sky, you have thoughts?
Yes, I do. Again, you heard me talk about the journey or of discovery that Matt in the Kitchen was. For me, I'm taking a lot of that experience into this new experience because we're learning and we're discovering. So while that education component has been offered up to our existing educators in the team, they're just exhausted. And so to do one more thing may not be the value that we thought it would be, but to reach out to what could be possible, Noah's right here. Noah's on that team as well. John Preto's right here. So
and
let's
John Preto
have a
is
conversation.
next. Yeah, John Preto's on deck here. And I actually probably should have gone to you first because you're kind of the lead on this. So tell us about your outreach or whether they can get involved.
We thought that educational would be a good tangential feature for the rocket launch. So Ray, you can hit us up. We thought that we would be more well received on the Saturday educational hour, but everybody seemed to be too busy. So we can absolutely do it. We just need some guidance and some structure and what you want us to do. And then we'll discuss that. Hit me up in Discord. We'll talk about it.
You should definitely talk to each other because the young woman involved in that, I'm sure, would get huge amounts of benefit from any kind of program you guys can put together. That's just fabulous. Noah Sargent has the thought before we leave.
Yeah, we're also organizing interviews. So if the Girl Scouts want to talk to the Rocketeers or talk to Vienna, who is a doctor and is very interested in space medicine, those are things we can connect the Girl Scouts with.
Absolutely awesome. So hie thee over to After Hours and make connections and make it so, as one of our favorite television shows said. Douglas Carmichael is up next. He says, Roland released a hardware wavetable synth engine, Enzyme, for their Phantom workstation yesterday. Could you see more complex synth engines appearing in hardware workstations to compete with DAWs? Will this become some plug-in thing that's generally used there? Synth engines? It's a good rock band name too. I don't see anybody else with their hand up there, so we may not have any takers on that. We may not have our synth people. Again, traditionally on Office Hours, Tuesday has been our audio thing, and I know there are a ton of musicians and a ton of synthesists. Is that the right word? People who use synthesizers in music there, so it might be a useful strategy to slip this into the Tuesday mix next Tuesday and see if you get more takers. It looks like we're striking out on this one today. Let's move to Jonathan Swan's question from Upper Marlboro, Maryland. Does Zoom's background noise suppression still work when original sound is turned on? Mitchell Hill.
By design, no. Although I've noticed some interaction in the earlier days when it was set to auto or low, but no, it's not supposed to do anything.
Rupert?
Yeah, when original sound is on, it disables the noise suppression. What it does also do some other things, and those are definable. You can choose what else it does. You cannot choose whether or not it does do noise suppression. It will turn that off. But the other features that it will disable are or enable stereo sound and echo cancellation. You can choose that, and then high fidelity and stuff like that. Those are optional in your sound settings, but it will inherently disable noise suppression. And I was actually just reading about this recently to do some other research, and some of the original work or early work on all the original sound and high fidelity stuff is quite interesting reading. You'll find that our friend of the show, Brendan, was involved in some of that work. I'll post some links in the chat.
Interesting. Thank you for that. Rupert McRae. No, that was Rupert. So we're moving on to the next question. That's Douglas Carmichael's question. The synthwave band, the Midnight, likes to have a tower of synths on stage, Prophet 5, for example, for appearance reasons. Wouldn't it be easier logistically to have one controller and multiple modules or a laptop? And how would you cut the setup time for that? Jason Beisch has some thoughts.
Well, of course it would be easier, but I don't think that's what they're going for. They're going for a very specific experience. And part of the experience is not just how it looks, or not just how it sounds, but how it looks. So, yeah, of course it would. And they made the creative decision not to.
You know, it's interesting. I don't know why this reminds me of it, but in cameras, you know, when these small camcorders that were very high performing started coming out, clients would look at you a little askance if you showed up on a serious set with a small camera. And I actually had people think, you know, can we cannibalize one of the old larger Betacams, stick this thing inside of it just for show purposes, because they just literally thought that people wouldn't take them seriously as a crew, even though they wanted to work with the small camera. And in some cases, actually, the small cameras were technically far better. I remember when digital video first started taking over from analog, I got gobsmacked with my first one at how well it held blacks, because before that, the analog cameras all had a pedestal level where the blacks were generally kind of grayish, not really black. And when I first, even the early DV cameras, black could be absolutely 000 black. And it was transformative for how I lit and how I shot things. So that was kind of like, maybe I'll just cannibalize the insides of a Betacam and put this little camcorder in it because I really like the way the pictures are. I wonder if there's a part of that with the synthesizers these days. You probably could just trigger modules and make it look boring but sound exactly the same. But as Jason mentioned, maybe it's part of the showmanship that you put in there. Courtney has a thought too. Courtney?
Yeah, I agree. It's for performance. You can easily map a keyboard into, you know, this lower half of the keyboard goes to this module, the upper half goes to this module, and it has to be able to dynamically change because, you know, there may be one lead solo in some piece of music that they have pre-programmed for a signature sound that has to sound exactly like it does in the album, so that has to be pre-programmed. And it gets confusing for a performer if they can't separate, you know, if the same one keyboard plays all the different sounds and they change from song to song, and within the song, keeping track of that either has to be driven off of a click track or SMPTE click track to automatically shift modules in and out to the keyboard mapping. So it's a lot easier just to have multiple keyboards and have each one tune, you know, like, okay, this is the keyboard that I use for the solo on this song, and this is the keyboard that I use for the solo on this song. So it's easier to keep straight, and it makes for a more dynamic performance because then, you know, it's like the audience can see when you're playing that solo and, you know, and when you're not.
I wonder if that's the equivalent of some drummers have a kit with 5 drums and some drummers have a kit with 150 drums. And you just wonder if they all use them every single one. Some might not. I don't know. Let's move on. Douglas Carmichael. I remember a concert with some beautiful ambient synth improvisations before the band came on stage. How do you determine where to start when improvising and what to play? Boy, there's a big question. And again, this not being our normal Tuesday with so many of our musically inclined panelists, I don't know if we're going to have the depth that you might want to experience if you come back for that, but Roscoe's going to take a shot at it, and so is Sky.
Well, I used to play in a Dixieland band, and you know, a lot of Dixieland music is here's the chord. Now figure out what kind of improvisation you want to do. Where do you figure out where to start? Well, usually, you know, piano. That'd be my easy answer there. That, you know, lays a nice chord structure underneath whatever the band's going to do on top of it. But so I don't know. That's a really tough question because a lot of times it's just somebody starts and the rest of us follow along.
Sky.
Yeah, my guess is I call it audio wallpaper. It's filler, and it's up to the artist to, you know, just fill some time. So consequently, what you want is you don't want to set up something that's going to take away from the headliner that's coming in, but you just need some ambient audible noise, for lack of a better, not to be disrespectful, but it's not why the audience showed up. So I think there's more opportunity for experimenting and trying things out.
I think there's also a combination. I mean, and this is just from somebody who watches a lot of music on various forms. I'm fascinated recently with Snarky Puppy, and they have a video that's on YouTube called Lingus that features a huge group of musicians, and it's some of the most interesting things I've watched lately. They've got some amazing players. And Corey Henry, who's been on my radar for a little while, is just an astounding keyboard player. And listening to that, it seems like there was structure and everybody knew where some parts were fixed, but there's clearly room, like there is in a lot of jazz, for improvised solos. And when Corey Henry starts, that kind of was a mind-blowing thing. So Darnell, I can't remember Darnell's last name, the drummer, is superb. So you're watching this combination of, this is the structure that we're working inside, but there's a lot of room for improvisation inside that structure. And the look that some of the players, this is what it just charmed me so much, the look at some of the other musicians who were superb on their own right gave Corey Henry, when he was in the middle of his playing, just gobsmacked. You can tell that they completely moved into fanboy mode from professional musician mode. And it really tells you that somebody's working at the height of their craft when you get everybody looking at you and what you're doing. Courtney has a thought.
Well, where you start is with the 4-chord progression. And if you look up 4-chord progression on Wikipedia, you'll know that, most pop songs and jazz songs go through a 4-chord progression, and you'll find out all about it on Wikipedia.
There's structure to this music thing. Is that what you're telling me? Interesting. Let's move on. Randy Egan in Vancouver, British Columbia says, Logmein Hamachi's VPN is not compatible with Mac M1s. Is there another VPN software solution that is simple and will see my whole internal network? And Jason Bache has thoughts on this.
Hi, Randy. Simple answer is no, not really. Anything that's Open VPN compatible, of course, will work with any Mac, whether it be M1 or otherwise. A hardware solution that would fix this would be the Meraki series would absolutely fix this. But short answer, not easily. In Mac OS Server, I suppose you could do your own VPN, but that's going to have it's going to carry a lot of weight that I don't think you want to deal with.
Excellent. Thank you for the answer. And I noticed that Alex is back. Welcome back in.
What'd I miss?
Well,
Nothing.
we've had, you missed the office hours show,
We
which
found
is
the answer
always
was 43.
43. You moved it to 43.
And we just ran out of questions here at 8:58, so I was going to have to pad. So it's great to have you back.
Did it all go well?
It went really well. Obviously, our producers did not let us down again, as they have never let us down over the course of all these shows. They had a lot of interesting questions, and it was fun to do.
Good. Well, I survived my meeting. The meeting, I had a meeting for the meeting for the meeting. So then we had the meeting. Then we had a follow-up meeting after the meeting. So I had 4 meetings in between, all on one thing. So anyway, so it went well. So anyway, so thanks everybody for your patience on that. And now we are going to, thanks to the producers for all the great questions and the panelists who kept it going without me. And I appreciate all of you for doing that. So thank you so much. And we're going to jump into, remember, we are going to do keynote tomorrow and education. It should be a lot of fun. We are going to have other things. I think Erica's going to come in at some point and talk about how she uses green screen in education. And we'll have a couple other ones. It's just that I have to schedule it all up. So anyway, now we're going to jump. All right. See you there. See you in after hours.